All right, I hope everyone is back. So ladies and gentlemen, now we are moving towards our next session, which is the last session for the day. As we promised, there was a lot about the growth of healthcare infrastructure and many more things that we learned. We got new ideas. And now, ladies and gentlemen, this session is going to be of Fireside Chat Technology Leapfrog. And for that, I would like to invite the speaker of this session, Mr. Dror Burman, founding partner, Innovation Endeavors, Mr. Prashant Prakash, Assel partner, and this session will be moderated by Mr. Deepak Prem Narayan, executive chairman and founder, ICS Group. And now I would like to request to start the pre-recorded session, please.
Okay. Dror and Prashant, my personal thanks, and on behalf of IMC also, for joining us today. When I reached out to both of you, the response was fantastic. And as we say in our country, thank you very much. Thanks, Prashant. Thanks, Dror.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Dror, the deal originally was that I was going to have a common buddy of Prashant and mine, Kiran Mazumdar, with you. But when I told Kiran what the topic was, she says, Deepak, I'm happy to drive your car, but she says, I'll get you the best guy in India. And Prashant and I had not known each other. And I must say that it's been fantastic connecting with Prashant. And I'm sure that this will be not your first catch-up. Let me put it that way. No. If I may, is that, both panelists I found, you all have a lot in common. That's, you started off in 2010, Dror, and you started out in 2008 when you founded Accel. And Dror, you were the co-founder with Innovation Endeavors with Eric Schmidt. So it's around the same time that who was the executive chairman for Google and Alphabet in 2010. Prashant, you have already invested in 200 odd companies, and you can see that again there's a commonality between Dror put in money in Uber in early stage, and you put in money in Ola.
And also we have a small anecdote which I probably not very clear in the document I gave you. Before Accel, I had a small seed fund called Erasmic, and the main sponsor of that fund who supported us was Google from the US. So this was their first, this was from the balance sheet. This was even before Google Ventures. This was 2000, this was in 2004. The first technology seed fund in India supported by Google. So there's something in common between them.
That's interesting. It's a small world, huh? Thanks.
Amazing.
What I also discovered is that both of you, you invest in early stage startups and those which are driving exponential rates of change in their industry, whether it's agriculture, whether it has to do with the supply chains, whether it's got to do with satellites and other areas, and even computational biology to fulfillment of centers. Both have partnered, which I find is a very interesting, creative thinkers and hardcore technologists, who have what it takes and who leverage data, compute, and advanced engineering to bring their visions to life and build world-class businesses. So there's a commonality, again, in the approach that I found. And Dror, Fabric, is which you are leveraging data sciences and robotics to re-architect the supply chain. Prashant, Netcraft company that you founded, or rather co-founded, a leading software solutions company focusing on retail and healthcare verticals. The Dror, if I might come to Zimmergen, which uses proprietary software and robotics to genetically engineer microbes to be used in things such as snacks and stealth bombers. But let me put it this way, Prashant, your Sweetie investment has done well. And this week, if you notice, SoftBank put in $500 million.
Yes.
The valuation zoomed up. So again, if you look subconsciously, there is a connectivity. Prashant, digital health companies like Onco.com, Axio Biosolutions, BestDoc, and these are building up precision medicines and AI life science applications. So these have been some of your investments. I'll go back to Freenome, which combines artificial intelligence, genomics, and biology to non-invasively detect certain cancers earlier. And this reminds me of what Sundar Pichai was saying some time back in terms of the diabetic retinology, where Google has developed that artificial intelligence through the retina. They're able to forecast almost 5 years in advance if somebody is going to get a heart problem, and doctors about 24 to 48 hours in advance about what the issues could be with other health issues. In my concluding introduction to both of you and to the audience, I must say that, Prashant, you've been a member now of the National Startup Advisory Council for Government of India and the chairman of Karnataka Vision Group for Startups. Dror, you are also in the ML7 associate at Creative Destruction Lab and a member of the steering committee of Israel Collaboration of Network. But I think what's very important is that the startups where you would invest, none of them will mess around, because you are also a part of the Special Forces unit of the intelligence corps of the Israeli Defense Force. So, if you are investing in my company, you can be rest assured I'd handle that money very carefully. Okay, I can go on and on. Let me put it this way. There is so much to talk about your out-of-the-box thinking, both of you, and how you see disruption, etc. If I might kick off, the objective is to talk in terms of new technologies and innovations that will be there in the future and what that will do to the healthcare. Cost is one part of it. But I go to the year 2030, Dror, and there is Emin, and there is a situation which has got to do with various tests the doctors want to perform and to find out what's wrong. Do you want to talk about that story? And it's going to be more like stories and leading up people in terms of, so my questions, not questions, the dialogue is going to be based on that. I hope it's okay, Prashant and Dror?
No,
Yeah?
no, very much. No, that's the right way to do it.
Perfect. So first of all, Deepak, thank you so much for the kind introduction and the kind words. And Prashant, really nice to meet you. And I hope this starts a very long relationship between us.
Yes,
very impressive background, of course. Maybe I can give a little bit of background of what attracted us to work in this intersection of computer science and life sciences. And maybe to your point, talk a little bit about the future. Will that work, Deepak?
Sure.
So maybe I'll go a little bit back to the history of why did we start innovation endeavors, and this goes back to 2010, as you mentioned, with Eric Schmidt, who was then the CEO of Google, and myself, starting to think about the future and realizing that while a lot of aspects of technology were moving very, very quickly, if you think about the ability to now instrument the entire world and get data, in our ability to compute on all this data, to infer predictions, in our ability to also use automation and engineering to essentially affect the physical and biological world. At the same time, a lot of the big industries, including healthcare and life sciences, but also including agriculture and food and logistics and supply chain and so on, were really not moving at a fast enough pace from an innovation perspective to meet the challenges that we knew that were coming, right? We knew that the world would need more food to feed the 10 billion people that we live in 2050. We knew that we'd have things like just happen and still happening with COVID, where sort of we start having infectious diseases spreading around the world faster, and we'll need to take care of people in a better, faster, cheaper way. And all of those sort of climate change and so on, a lot of big challenges we knew we had to solve, and we realized that the pace of innovation was not moving quickly enough. And that really led us to start doing deep thinking and understanding what's behind it. And we realized that there was a lot of different problems. If you take that into healthcare specifically, we realized that healthcare is not, to start with, life science is not really well understood. If you think about our understanding of biological systems, for example, it's largely that we don't really understand how things work, in spite of a lot of work that has been done over the last few centuries and few decades. Beyond that, for the things that we could understand, a lot of those cycles were mostly driven by humans, essentially looking at all the data that they could actually process, and then using their common sense and intuition and expertise to essentially decide what they wanted to do next, how do they want to design experiments, and then run them in relatively inefficient ways. So essentially, they would not use machines or, for the last few decades to run a lot of those experiments, which would result in, fewer experiments a day that would essentially result in a very, very slow pace of innovation. So again, it was a lot of our inability to get the data to really understand complex systems, and then the mostly human-driven cycles of innovation that were not fast enough to allow us to solve really big problems. And so what excited us back in 2010, and actually even more so exciting for us now, is that we believe that we are now just at the beginning of an inflection point, such that there are a few things that are actually in play, and we can talk more about them. One is that we can now start to generate data through new type of instrumentation in a way that wasn't possible before, and that results in new types of data that are being created and captured, and sort of at quantities of data that were never, again, we could never even process before. Now we can store and process that using advanced computation. Which brings me to the second point. We can now use a lot of compute, whether it's in the cloud or whether it's in the edge, to actually take these massive amounts of data and use machine learning or edge compute to essentially infer different predictions. What experiments do we want to run next? What kind of disease does this patient have, and so on. And then the third part of it is that we can now use advanced engineering, whether it's automation, robotics, to run 1000x more experiments at the 1/1000th of the time and cost that we were used to. And at the same time, we can use genetic engineering, right? CRISPR and sort of a lot of the tools that we've started to see to essentially affect the physical and biological worlds in a way that weren't possible even a few years ago. So all of those things together allow us to create much, much faster cycles with machines at the core of that cycles coupled with humans, such that, again, we can run 1000x more experiments at a fraction of the time and cost that we were used to. And that's a game-changing factor to this industry, and we see that as the core of a lot of the exciting things that are happening. So I'll stop here, and then happy to answer and sort of expand more.
Prashant,
Yeah.
Any thoughts on this?
No, very much echo what Dror is saying. The only things I'll mention is there's a kind of a cross-border element now emerging in some of these areas. So India provides immense amount of data and early access to some of these types of biological data that would help in building models and getting your early lab validations. I think there is an acceleration possible because of the vast amount of data that we can generate with our population here. That can help in the acceleration of what Rod was talking about. And the other element is the mobile first world. So when it comes to digital therapeutics and the personal device, as in your mobile and these kinds of devices that you wear today, play a very big role. And I think there is that instrumentation, like Dror was saying, is even more accentuated in a very mobile-centric world in India. And finally, the idea of frugal innovation. I think we are able to, sitting in India, do some of these things at 1/3 the cost because of the availability of similar talent that is very hard to find in the West, and also leverage and build on IP that is today global. So I think just a few things where we have very similar elements, but there is this cross-border element to the acceleration that George spoke about.
Prashant, would you like to speak about one or two cases?
Yeah, very much. So I think one good example I'd like to talk about is you were talking about this AI-based eye scanning thing that Sundar Pichai was talking about. So we have a company that's in commercialization that has been built out of Bangalore here in India, which does eye screening and then uses AI to detect early blindness. But there's a device element that they've also built. It's a very rugged device that can, in very remote rural areas, because there's data connectivity. I mean, India today produces more data than any other country in the world, right? So we have cheap data and data accessible everywhere. So you can, in a very remote place, detect early blindness, signs of early blindness, detect diabetes, and do all that because this whole screening can be done in the cloud, done remotely, and in many cases, the early diagnosis can be accelerated by 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Then maybe just one more example in terms of platforms that are today being.
Sorry.
Yeah.
This particular thing that you said, and you said the equipment is very rugged.
Yes.
Now, if two thoughts come to my mind. What is the kind of cost for this equipment, and what kind of expertise that it requires to run it?
Yeah, that's a very good question because that's really what it's engineered for. It's for a rural setting, anywhere in Brazil, anywhere in China, or anywhere in India. So it's about a $300 device, and it can be operated by a very, very basic technician. This company is called Forest Health, and now they're in 25 countries across the world. And these devices have been deployed across these number of countries.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Dror, would you like to share your experience, one of the investments that you made in a similar area?
Yeah, I'm happy to. There are a few examples, and I would say that a lot of my investments touch this intersection of computer science and life sciences, mostly because I find this one of the most important and most exciting areas of startups now. There is so much to do, and it's also creating this interesting phenomena of mission-driven companies such that they can attract actually a lot of talent that used to work at Facebook and Google and many of the big tech companies that now want to go and create good in the world, and they find this intersection very interesting. So one interesting example would be actually a company that just announced yesterday that they're going public through a SPAC merger. It's a company called Vicarius Surgical. And Vicarius look into the surgical robotics market. And there's been a big company in the surgical robotics market that is sort of controlling the market has been controlling the market for a long time. And a lot of the more traditional robotics approach in surgical robotics, have been created at a time when robots were not as sophisticated as they are today. So if you think about the robots that most surgeons have been using over the last 20 years, it would be those sort of very bulky, very expensive, very big devices that would often cost millions of dollars, which would make it too expensive for the majority of the world. And they would actually force the surgeons to adapt themselves to using the robot. So the user experience would be very inefficient in such that the surgeons would have to go and do a surgery in a very different way than they would used to. What's interesting in what Vicarius Surgical did is that they used a completely new approach for this kind of surgery. It's a sort of micro robotics coupled with a VR headset, such that actually the robot can mimic the way that a surgeon is operating. Right? So you can think about a robot that goes into the body through a tiny port, opens up, and you have two arms that the surgeon wearing a headset can actually operate using their hands, such in a similar way that they would operate today in a regular way. And if you think about it, surgical robotics is not a new field, but it's still, if you think about the number of surgeries done currently around the world, I believe it's about 1% of surgeries are done through surgical robotics because all the things that I mentioned. We hope that Vicarius Surgical will actually democratize access to these kind of tools such that they could be available at every type of surgery room everywhere in the world because it would be so cheap and so easy to operate. And that's mind-blowing to me. So this is one example of sort of how we use now robotics to essentially democratize surgical tools or advanced surgical tools, minimally invasive tools. And by the way, I didn't say that, but the majority of the world is still using open surgeries as the main surgery methodology, which results in millions of people dying or suffering from the consequences of what you have with open surgeries. So we need to make this change, and we need to see this happening faster. So that's one example. Maybe you have questions. I'm happy to answer any questions on that.
Okay. Now, Dror, I have 2 points over here. Is it possible to, let's say, in a country like India, okay, one is the cost element of this, whether it's $50,000 or $70,000, but it can go to the smaller cities where, let's say, the population is, let's say, 100,000 people. That by Indian standards is small. And is it possible for the surgeon to sit in a larger city and control the operation?
Absolutely. That's not the first application we are releasing. We believe that the first application will be a surgeon using sitting next to the patient and operating just through in a minimally invasive way. But this system allows for that. So we would be starting to see over time surgeons sitting remotely and operating. You can start thinking about how the implications for the military using such a technology to operate remotely in the field and so on. So those things will become possible and somewhat dependent on the strengths of the cellular network, which I know is in India now is one of the best in the world. So all the sort of the network connectivity and the ability to now rely on remote expertise will now become possible.
And I think Skylo could help in the connectivity.
Sorry?
I think Skylo could help in the connectivity.
Skylo could help with the connectivity for sure. That's very exciting as well.
Where Dror and I are obliquely associated. So I was just being a little naughty. It's based on satellite 2G,
got it.
communication. Yeah. And
Deepak, would you like me to give another example, or we can switch to another question?
Like, the whole idea is to have anecdotes, and on that basis. Then after that, I'd like to move to Prashant with something else which I find very interesting, what he's doing in the India context, maybe. But I would very much love you to give another example.
I would love to do that. There are so many interesting examples, but I was thinking about one that is close to my heart. So if you think about infectious diseases, right? Infections currently today, I was trying to find the accurate numbers, but it's hard to find accurate numbers, but it's roughly caused 20% of human death worldwide. If you think about sort of infections as the main factor that is causing that. And one of the problems that we have today is that it's very hard to identify the pathogens, the agents of those infections that actually create them. And because the current conventional tests basically they are limited. They sort of do a search of one. They try to see, is this kind of infection, is this kind of pathogen, or is this that kind of pathogen, and so on and so forth. And they're also limited by how invasive they are. They're limited by the time to get the results, because in some of those cases, it takes weeks to actually get the blood culture to be ready for those kind of queries. So Kalus, one of our companies, is actually using a completely different approach. You can think about using genomics and machine learning to essentially look at all the different pathogens that exist in your blood, look at different signatures of what it could be, and then within a few hours give you a very specific answer that this is the pathogen that is causing this kind of infection and this is the right way to treat it. And again, if you think about our ability to do that, we can look at 1,000x more pathogens within a fraction of the time it would take today to look at even one of them. And this is a groundbreaking technology that we believe would save millions of people every year around the world.
And when is this going to go to the market?
This is already in the market and being commercialized as of about a year ago.
All right. Okay. And has this been launched in India?
I don't believe it has been launched in India. It has been launched here in the US, and this is one thing that we hope to start expanding internationally over the next few years as well.
Okay. Thanks, Rod. That's also very interesting. Prashant, any thoughts on this, or would you like me to move on to something else?
No, so I see a lot of similarities in the type of companies we are working on. So there's a company called Turbine.ai that we've invested in, which does a simulation first approach to how you discover targets for cancer therapy. So they model the entire cell and the mechanics of the cell and the cell pathways, and then you're able to figure out a specific drug for a specific person with a specific genetic makeup or a biochemistry makeup. So this company is already working with some of the large pharmas globally to accelerate the process and the discovery of drugs, specific drugs for novel therapies.
All right. Okay. And but it's with the pharma companies and not with the hospitals?
No, this will be usually with the pharma, because they're the ones that probably have the repertoire of drugs which they now want to exercise and see with this technology, is there a way to repurpose them for specific folks, right? So because these drugs would have been tried in different circumstances, but now you can run the simulation models and see would it make sense to now trial them in different circumstances for different types of people.
So would this be for boutique pharmaceutical companies or the larger ones too?
This is for the larger ones too. They're working with one or two of the larger ones too.
Right.
Because everybody wants to leverage, the current molecules they have and the current research they've done.
Okay. Prashant, I had a thought with you. You talk about the India pharma story for the next wave of life sciences globally. Yeah. And right. Is there a model emerging, for IP-led life sciences companies from India? And could they be participating in solving the global problems? This is one instance that you gave, but I'd like you to share some more instances and how India could become important from the regulatory part, other than the cost element itself.
Right. So I think just a little bit of a rewind here, right? So the pharma story in India initially replicated the IT outsourcing story, which is basically reverse engineering a well-known drug, a generic drug, what people call as small molecules, and then manufacturing them in mass quantities and supplying it for the rest of the world. I think that was the early pharma, and I think a lot of companies like Cipla, Reddy Labs did very well and created multiple billion-dollar companies. But I think in the last 10 years, I think the next generation of Indian entrepreneurs are starting to kind of see, we'll build products here which will be trialed here but be applicable for the rest of the world. So I think that's like a 10-year-old journey now, and we're starting to see some early examples. I spoke about Forus, which was iDevice. There is another company that is built a wound healing technology. One of the major reasons people die, whether it's in trauma or in the battlefield in war, is because of excessive bleeding. And so these folks use a very interesting bio-based mechanism for accelerated wound healing. And they've, of course, have IP on it, all engineered here in India. But now they have FDA approval, the 510(k) approval in the US. And interestingly, they supply to armies across the world. And I think, they also supply to the Israeli army, I think. So in multiple setups, right? So wound healing is required, or managing bleeding is required in surgeries. It's required in your dentist. So this is a company that now has a very broadly applicable product engineered in India, but that could be supplied for the rest of the world. And this was unthinkable maybe a decade ago, where Indian IP will just within a period of 5-6 years get US FDA approval and CE approval in Europe and be applicable for the rest of the world.
Good. George, any stories that you would like to share?
First, I'm very excited about all the innovation that happens in India. I don't know if you've had a chance to talk about it, Deepak, but India has been one of my favorite countries. I spent quite some time in India in different trips, including backpacking through most of northern India. And
that was after you got married. Am I correct, George?
This was just before I got married, and after my military service, I spent some time in India, really backpacking through most of the northern parts, a lot of places that a lot of my Indian friends never visited. So it's one of the most beautiful places in the world I've been to, and the people were always amazing. So I can't wait to have more excuses to go back and visit and do actually more business with India.
And if I may interrupt, if I may interrupt, I just want to make a point here. I think the best kept secret is the southern part of India. So you have not seen India till you've seen the southern part. Sorry, go ahead.
No, of course. I haven't had a chance to go there. I've only been to the north, and I've been to Rajasthan. Was probably sort of the thousands, the most thousand area that I visited. But I really look forward to visiting more and doing more business with India. As I'm excited to hear about the things you're saying, Prashant, about the new innovation coming out of India. And I'm clearly one of the exciting things that have happened at the macro level was really the partnership between Israel and India over the last few years.
Right,
And
right.
I think there is a lot more to come on that side as well. So all those things are exciting. I think will drive more success. I think a lot of the innovation we see, and I'm now based in the US, but to some extent invest mostly in the US, but also globally. We're starting to see more of those innovation, this type of innovation actually goes worldwide. So a lot of those companies start here as sort of as a first market, and then they expand. And I think Deepak, you talked about Skylo earlier and the opportunity to take new technology to allow for better connectivity. And what's a better market than India to launch something like that, where there is so much opportunity? And I've just read about saving fishermen. So I think it was 7 fishermen lives that were saved because Skylo, they had a Skylo equipment that they could signal back to the shore that they had traveled. And those sort of things makes me very excited. I think in terms of healthcare and life sciences, a lot of the work that's been done will not be limited to the US. So for example, we have a company called therapeutics that is built based on a research was done by a Nobel Prize winner that is creating this new approach to microscopy. So think about a new super resolution microscope that can look way deeper into the cells, into living cells, to see things that were never possible before. We could actually visualize the way proteins are moving real time as they interact with different molecules and different assets that we want to try. And based on that, we are building now a new drug development platform, essentially. And again, this company hopefully will allow us to accelerate drug development in a way that we could only dream of even 5 years ago. And obviously the entire world would benefit from those kind of new type of access. Because again, if you think about it, if you think about life sciences and drug development, it actually takes us now about twice the time and twice the capital to come up with new drugs and take them to market, as opposed to even 10 years ago. Right? So we need to change this kind of economics, and those kind of technologies actually allow us to do that. Similarly, we have a company called Viz.ai that looks into stroke. If you think about stroke, we have stroke is one of those cases where time matters a lot. We say that time is brain. Every minute that goes by untreated, you lose a certain portion of your brain. So if enough time goes by, the patient dies or have severe issues for the rest of their lives. So Viz looked into using computer vision and machine learning to look at CT enneagrams rather than find the one expert that exists in every city or in a small state. You find sometimes it's very few people in the state that would actually be able to read those in a very short amount of time. And we now use machine learning and computer vision to read through those CT enneagrams, come up quickly with what's actually going on, and then dispatch the right surgeon to actually go and treat this patient again in a fraction of the time that we used to just even a couple of years ago. So those kind of things are starting to happen, and they trickle down very quickly, I think, to the rest of the world and would benefit from the same type of innovation.
Fantastic. Dror, I'm fortunate that this is at this time of night in India, because I have grandkids who are just becoming smart. And I tell them that, listen, age means that I've got experience and my knowledge, and I'm a wise man. And as soon as they hear this, that every day my brain is diminishing, I'm in the shit house. But I see this as also as a banker, I see this as an investment opportunity that IMC gets investment fees, advisory fees, are putting Prashant and Dror together on any transaction. Okay. I'm being naughty about that.
No.
So I'm delighted about this particular aspect. But as far as the transformational life sciences trends on digital therapeutics that you were talking about, Prashant, as well as digital, the chronic care personalization or the microbiome sciences that you find interesting for early stage investing, are there such opportunities that are coming up? And you can share that with us.
Sure. So I'll just share one quick example. I think there is a company called Digby, which basically uses this combination of digital therapeutics, and marries it with the personalized gut that a person, dynamics that a person has, and the DNA makeup, and uses that and the idea of food as medicine, and to manage things like weight loss, inflammation, and some of these. And of course, the AI kind of brings all of this together in terms of how you build the model and how you personalize it to the particular individual. So this whole idea of personalized medicine, I think is really undergoing a very, very transformational shift. And I think digital therapeutics is basically going to make that real, this whole idea of personalized medicine. And one other application, this is slightly more on the delivery side, but I'll touch upon that. Cancer is another such disease where everybody goes through that journey and goes through that process very, very differently. And that needs to be orchestrated and managed digitally. And today, unfortunately, in most hospitals, even globally, it's a very human thing. There are protocols, but the protocols are very generic. They don't get personalized. They don't really take into account a lot of the individual circumstances and makeup. And of course, different ethnic groups of people, right? So we have a company called Onco.com, which is basically, Onco is a virtual cancer hospital, which kind of relooks at the idea that there needs to be a companion, a digital companion, to take somebody through this cancer process. It's not just about getting a second opinion. It's not just about using the right drug, but it's the whole journey, and it's a very complex journey, and it's a very it takes a toll on everybody in that. So there's mental dynamics, there is family, community dynamics, and then there is, of course, the health and the protocol dynamics. So how do you bring all of that together in the through a very virtual kind of hospital model? And this is a need in India, because we just don't have the time and the money and the resources to build real hospitals. When we are now, I think, Deepak, we are the chronic capital of the world. I mean, we have more people who have chronic diabetes and chronic heart, but we are also very soon approaching a chronic stage. I mean, as in a very high number of cancer incidences, which were more a Western phenomena previously, but now more in India. And it's a very expensive thing to manage this disease, and we have to think differently and think disruptively when we need to look at efficient and appropriate cost models for medical care for a complex and expensive disease like cancer. So that's where personalized medicine and AI and rethinking a very asset-light model for healthcare delivery becomes very important.
Okay. Dror, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think just quick thoughts on both cancer and obesity, and both are important also here in the US as they are in India. I think on cancer, one of the big things we need to find a way to do is to diagnose earlier, right? We all know that, the earlier you can diagnose, the better the options are. And so one of our companies that you mentioned earlier, Deepak, Freenome, has been taking a completely new approach to think about cancer diagnostics through blood sample. A lot of companies tried to do it for a long time. The problem is that they were only looking at specific biomarker in your blood, which is generally a cfDNA. Essentially, it's a floating DNA of a cancer cell. And in the early stages of cancer, you have so little of it such that you can't draw enough. You need to draw a lot of blood in order for you to try to overcome the signal-to-noise ratio. So what Freenome found a way to do is to create a sort of a view of a lot of different biomarkers in your blood, and use machine learning to sort of fuse all of those together into an inference of or prediction that you're likely to have a stage 1 colorectal cancer. So again, you can do that now rather than wait for a stage 3 when you go through a colonoscopy that, again, most people actually don't even comply with and they don't do, to actually a very simple blood sample that within the next few years will be able to tell you if you have any one of 5 or 7 types of cancer. So this is sort of the early stage diagnostics, which I think will save a lot of lives over time. It will be accessible anywhere in the world because there's no reason this should not be available in India as well. The second thing with regard to obesity, which is, as far as I understood from Prashant and Deepak, this is becoming an increasing problem in India as well as it is in the US. I think the US has the worst problem in the world. And we are learning to deal with it in different ways. We've taken a very deep look into this old intersection of supply chain and food, which, if you think about the problem in the US and to some extent would be the same problem in India, a lot of the problem really results from the waste problem that exists today in food, and the sense that it's not economical for healthy food or fresh food to reach some of those regions in the US that will not be economical enough to actually to provide this kind of food. And so in the US, I think about 24% of the zip codes are actually called food deserts because they don't get the access to those foods. But essentially, this is a supply chain problem when we can now use advanced data science to understand what kind of food will people consume, when would they do it, and so on and so forth. So we have a couple of companies directly looking at that. One of those companies is called Fresh. The other one is called Farmer's Fridge, where the whole idea is to work on new ways to bring healthy, fresh food to everybody in a way that would be economical for everybody in the process. And we're starting to see that starting to happen, and I think that would allow us to both make people healthier, but also get rid of the food waste problem that is affecting the environment and sort of affecting a lot of people in the world.
All right, so that's very interesting. And let me put it this way, Prashant, how do you see some of the areas that you spoke about, and draw some of the areas that you spoke about? You know, China has done a fair amount of work in these areas too. You know, so how do we see ourselves competing against them?
Prashant, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so happy to go first. See, I think when it comes to AI and when it comes to health and some of these areas, I think there's a lot of work that's happening in China, and I'm sure some of their work will also go global. But I think what I think is important in some of these areas is also collaboration. So I think the deeper collaboration that a country like India can do and have with Europe and with the US. For example, one of our companies is working on an antibody platform that helps develop these monoclonal antibodies for cancer therapy, right? So they're working with Mount Sinai in the US for their early clinical trials and their early research. So I think the ability to collaborate globally, I think, will help us be competitive and be relevant, irrespective of what's coming out of China. And I'm sure good stuff will also come out of there.
Thanks, that's well put. Dror?
Yeah, I fully agree with Prashant. I think that the biggest thing we should be focusing on is collaboration. And 2020 has been an amazing year for that, right? If you think about the collaboration we've done globally as maybe a new playbook for how do we think about life sciences or healthcare problems, and looking at the things coming out of China and the research and the ability to sequence the virus very, very early from early samples taken in China, immediately sharing that with the entire world, such that you can now have tens or hundreds of thousands of different research groups working and collaborating on findings, I think is exactly the template that I would like to see over time. So I don't think this should be, while China and the US and maybe China and India are sort of becoming more competitive in other domains, I think in some of those domains like healthcare, I hope that this drives sort of a playbook of how do we do more together and how do we learn from each other, because there's so much to benefit from it.
Look, I'd be more than happy to carry on in the sense that not happy, I'm delighted at the conversation. But it so happens that there is a time constraint, you know, and I hate my chamber guys when they do something like this, because this is a conversation that the audience which is going to participate, and this is from all sectors, pharma companies, doctors, hospitals, startups, and they're really going to be enjoying this. And I'll be taken to task that why I didn't continue longer. But unfortunately, this is the last session that we have, and it's the most important session that day, but followed with the address of my chief minister. So with this, look, I would yet like, is there anything else? I would very much like Dror. I mean, Prashant, if you can say something more, and Dror, maybe for a minute or 2 minutes. And then with that, I'd like to just conclude that.
Deepak, I'll just say that thank you for, you know, putting me and Dror together. So I'm sure there'll be more collaborations here for sure, starting from this. And you one. I don't know if it's going to be monetary, but maybe something for making this happen.
It's going to be South Indian food.
A very delightful conversation.
With Dror, and I will live in Bangalore with you and Kiran. Let me put it this way. Dror, let me share something with you.
Sure.
Prashant has a very interesting family history. And, you know, Cubbon Park is a very famous park in Bangalore and even in India. It is the lungs of Bangalore city, you know. And in spite of the number of cars that have gone up and the carbon footprint that's coming up, it's literally like it sinks the carbon. His forefathers managed the garden, and that had gone off my radar until I saw the garden behind Prashant just now. So they created the garden. They were part of the climate change, let's put it this way, almost 100 years ago.
Wow.
So, yeah, no, that's very interesting, you know. So that's the, and I was just talking to an ex-friend of mine, he was an ex-minister, and he's from Gujarat, and his Israeli technology is helping him in the arid zone in Gujarat to grow pomegranates which are this size. So I think we are ending up with, you know, horticulture, floriculture, and agriculture. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be climate change that's important. And look, thank you very much, Dror. I know how busy you have been because you just closed your fund, and there are lots of issues to be tied up. And Prashant, absolute delight catching up, and we'll be in touch. Take care. Thank you. But one last question, if I may ask before this, is that if I wanted to live 100 years, what kind of, are you working on something like that?
I'll let Dror go because I think there's a lot more happening on that in the US than India. That's one area that's still cutting edge that is beyond what's happening.
Well, I think maybe I'll end with two things if it's okay with you. I think just to your question, Deepak, I think a lot of it has to do with better diagnostics, better therapeutics, and to be honest, also better food. And I think we are working, there is no sort of one single factor, and I think we are working across all those areas, probably 10 or 100x faster than even, you know, a decade ago. There's so much happening, and it's so exciting that you know, maybe you can even live to 1,000 years pretty soon. So, you know, that's in the works. I think just to maybe as a closing comments, I just wanted to say two things. One, the future is exciting, right? And I don't know exactly who would be in the audience here, but the one thing I really want to call out for is just that there's so much opportunity in the intersection of technology and healthcare or life sciences. And it's really encouraging to see more talent on both sides going back to collaborating in a way that wasn't possible before. And I think that over the next decade, we're going to start seeing Google-sized companies that are going to be created in those kind of areas. And they're going to look very, very different than anything we've gotten used to. They're not going to look like the traditional pharma companies, and they're not going to look like Google. It will be maybe similar to the way Amazon got started and sort of disrupted the commerce world. And it didn't look like a Macy's with a website. It was organized completely differently. And I think we're going to start seeing those kind of companies in the life sciences world that look like a combination of, you know, a Google and Merck. So this is sort of one aspect, and a lot of amazing talent that will flow into those companies from both technology and biology. will benefit greatly from this kind of innovation. And I want to see more talent going into exploring those areas. So maybe when you talk to your grandkids, encourage them to pursue that kind of field, because this computational biology world is probably the most exciting thing that you can work on. The second thing, personally, I would love to do more with India. I'm so excited to hear what Prashant was talking about the innovation and what's coming. So I would love to do more investments there and visit more and do more, find more ways to collaborate. So thank you so much for exposing me to all that today. Thank you.
Not at all. Fantastic. Delighted at this. And I love that anything that my country benefits and the globe benefits. Thank you. And that's what the chamber is about. Thank you. Good night, Prashant.
Thank you very much.
Good night. Good night.
Bye, George. Good night. And thanks, team, for helping out. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Well, that was a wonderful session, quite insightful. Thank you, Mr. Deepak Prem Narayan, Mr. Berman, and Mr. Prakash.